Okay, Michael, it looks like we're on.
Oh, all right. Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for joining this session of our 11/11 event for WPP. I'm going to talk with some of my dear friends today who are going to talk a lot and know a lot more about retail than I do. My friend Harry, who heads up VML's Y&R's strategy for Asia and Chief Transformation Officer for Asia, and a longtime collaborator of mine. And a dear friend of mine, Beth Ann, who I love what she was doing in commerce. She's the CEO of formerly Commerce, and now it's VML Y&R Commerce. I botched that up, I'm sure. She's the global CEO of VML Y&R and the CEO of New York. And lots of great people here that know a lot of stuff about retail. And again, we're going to talk about brands, we're going to talk about retail, and just let them talk instead of me. But I'm going to bring up some topics. And the first topic is, because I have all this great data through BAV, the product that I head up and develop around the world. And so we can measure brand love and we can measure retail love. So I wanted to talk a little bit about love and just look at what love means around the world. And we're going to do a little bit of US, global, China, and how do consumers think about retail differently and love differently. And I thought this was interesting. When we look at love in the US and the UK, it's much more about trust and dependability. It's a little more sensuous and a little bit, has a little bit more of an edge in China. And I thought that was really interesting. I'd love your thoughts on that, because I have no idea why.
Hari, you want to go first?
Sure. I think you'll see this as a consistent theme today, Michael, as we're talking about it. And so what does love mean, and what does trust mean, and what does value mean as we talk about it? China is increasingly emphasizing experience as a key criteria for how they measure brands and how they evaluate brands, especially the Chinese consumers. And there's a lot of it, and you've seen online retailers get into offline retailers getting into online, and really retaining that experience and retaining that emphasis on trying to give that sense of personalization, trying to give that sense of good value without losing out of the experience I think is what is driving love among Chinese retailers, among Chinese brands, retail brands, among consumers.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think to add to that and take a bit of a global view, bringing the U.S. and the U.K. into the conversation too. Oftentimes, it's what is missing in people's lives that brands need to fill. It's a high, tall order for brands, right? But we see these things as being cyclical and oftentimes a bit of commentary on the broader view of what's going on in the world. And so I think that's some of what we are seeing reflected here. If you think about what, from a love standpoint, is missing in the lives of US and UK consumers, that's not being fulfilled by other institutions, other people, perhaps, or just what they feel is like lacking in their lives. And I think there sometimes the language gets a bit, consolidated, if you will. But when they're thinking about how can you show that you love me, that you know me, that you're reaching my needs right now, I think you're seeing brands leaning into this. We're trustworthy. You can count on us. We'll be there for you. Down to earth, I take to mean a little bit more about authentic, maybe a little bit vulnerable. And so if you think about the brands that are performing really well in the US right now, whether that be a Walmart all the way through to a Starbucks, maybe even a Tiffany on the luxury side, these are brands that are showing up for people right now with, kind of enduring sentiment. And like, we've got your back, we are there for you. And also not afraid to take a stand with some of the other dialogue that's going on right now. And I think in China, there probably isn't that same kind of responsibility on brands right now, giving them more space to show up in that more entertaining, more passionate way that Hari was getting to.
Interesting. They're very interesting stuff, guys. So let's talk a little bit more about love. You gave me some interesting brands that I think consumers in the U.S. definitely love, and Walmart they love for certain reasons. We did a lot of work with love, and we dissected the most loved brands around the world. You can see we love them for different reasons. We love them for their dependability or for their value. We love them because they're just exciting. We can't get them out of our heads. Or we love them because they make me happy, like Disney or something. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. You mentioned some great ones in the, I think of them as U.S. brands, even though I'm sure they're global. These are some Chinese brands that rank to the top on some of the components of love. Either one of you, if you have thoughts, I just look at this. I know the American brands. I'm like, okay, I get it. The other brands I'm not as familiar with. So I'd love some, do these feel right? Is there some, or just talk about one brand that makes the list and why people love them?
Sure. I think the list sort of emphasizes the point, Michael, that whether it's people or brands, love is reciprocal, right? People will love you if you love them in the first instance. And the brand I'd pick, and it's not an obvious choice, is Hai Di Lao. Hai Di Lao is actually a chain of hot pot restaurants, the most unlikely candidate for love. But it's not the food that's love. It is entertainment meets pampering meets food as an experience. It's an amazing, you should read up about it at some time. It's just amazing how much attention they pay to consumers. So the wait experience is one of the most fascinating ones, where you're giving manicures, you're offered massages, you're allowed to sort of serve and play games with kids, etc. In fact, consumers have been known to, and this is, I know people it's happened to, where people want to wait a little longer because the wait experience is so fantastic. So the brand gives out a tremendous amount of love to consumers, makes you feel really important and cared for. And I guess consumers respond and reciprocate by saying that I love you too.
That's interesting, really interesting. I've never wanted to wait, so that's definitely true love. Thank you, guys. Let's talk a little bit more about some other metrics that matter. We talk a lot about trust, because if you might love somebody, but if they don't work, the product doesn't work, or it doesn't, fit in your life, that's not a good thing. So trust is important. What's interesting is we see this in China, that the consumers are seeing less trust in brands today. I mean, there's so much more transparency, obviously. So trust is in decline. It's not just a Chinese phenomenon. We see this globally, that consumers trust brands less than they used to. It doesn't mean that they don't trust some brands a lot. And in fact, we know that trust is still really important. Really important. It drives advocacy, it drives pricing power, it drives esteem. So again, we see the power of trust. This is some highly trusted brands in China. Is somebody interesting? Any brand, US, China, global, like trust is so important. It's harder and harder to get. Let's talk about trust.
Well, I'll go back and start this one off to the slide earlier where you listed, the brands across, those different dimensions. And, and pull that forward into the trust conversation. And, when I saw that slide, I was like impressed that Nike was in 4 of the 5 dimensions. And I think a lot of that comes down to that single idea and word of trust. And I think Nike has earned it because it's withstood decades now and generations. It is there in quality. So I think a lot of the other brands that have come into the space to try to compete have not been able to compete across quality dimensions. And I think that there's it's Nike before they even tell you it's Nike on so many levels. And I think that from both a global consumer as well as a Chinese consumer, that's incredibly important. And it also is, while, in some ways maybe borderline a sense of, luxurious identity in it. I think it's also just very much an everyday brand that feels like it always speaks to the best of us and the best of the brand and the, sort of the best of celebrity, influencer, and endorser. And, it's become a true mainstay in our lives. As a brand that pretty much, I would say, if you were to interview people, probably everybody has some Nike somewhere in their closet. And I think that's a big statement, and it never feels like it sort of goes out of style. It's not trend, but it also feels like it's always sort of meeting people in their lives, where they want to be today. And I think, and that's also done on a global scale, which I think is actually incredible. The last quick point I'll make about a Nike is, and I think that's why it's performing so well in China, is it's one of the few brands that is direct to consumer, but has chosen selectively where else it wants to retail, but is physical and digital. So, again, you are getting a blurring of the lines across its channels in a very seamless, very integrated way, but it's delivering for the consumer against digital and physical moments of retail extraordinarily well.
Yeah, there's a consistency to it that it's just amazing. I agree. Harry, your thoughts?
I think trust is, again, I echo everything that Beth Ann said. And the other aspect of trust is very important. And Nike sort of typifies this, is really allowing humanity to show as brands. And that's what, as retailers move to e-commerce, that's probably the single biggest thing that consumers are missing. In the old world, it used to be about the salesperson, the person on the floor that used to sort of interact with and know. And you could go back and say, I bought it from you last week. They rarely refer to the name of the retailer, but it's that individual, and it doesn't fit me. Can I have a exchange? But I think Nike's managed to move towards e-commerce without losing that humanity. And they make sure they cover up for that, or not cover up is the right word. They sort of compensate for that with the way the brand is. So even when Nike uses celebrities, it's always talking about the humanities, the frailties of those people. They're not coming there as perfect beings. And I feel that really helps in building that trust, that authenticity and that humanness that you sort of manage to portray and infuse the brand with, and the experience as well. Again, having that human touch, human-centric experience is very critical for a brand to earn trust today.
Yeah, I think that word human is so important. Every client of mine has been talking about being more purposeful and connecting and being transparent. And it's, to do that right is not easy. And I think Nike walks the walk, and in terms of, what it does and who they align with and who they support. And so just a great example of trust through humanity. That's very interesting. Okay, we're going to move to another topic that's a little less about trust, but trust should be part of it. That's luxury. I in the U.S., I've been studying luxury for a while now, and it definitely feels like it's shifting. And I just want to show you a really interesting chart as a thought starter. I'd love you guys to think about luxury around the world, and because luxury is still important, of course, but this was luxury in the 90s in the U.S. on the left-hand side, right? Luxury was Jaguar and Rolex and Rolls-Royce and Ferrari and Chanel and amazing brands, still luxury brands today, but on the right, you can see what's happened to them over time. While they still have amazing stature, right? They may not fit into our lives in the same way as they used to, and maybe we're looking for other types of brands to fulfill that new form of luxury. And I could think of some that are not in this traditional set. It's not just a U.S. phenomena. The traditional luxury brands today are in fatigue, right? They're not the ones that are leading and disrupting as much as they could be. So. Love your thoughts on luxury. Again, thinking of retail or even outside of retail. What does luxury look like today, and what matters? And are there differences in the U.S. versus China?
I think while there's luxury fatigue, I think it's some of that may come from the fact that they push themselves into the demand that is coming from mass market. And so I think that's going to constantly be a bit of tension. And you're definitely seeing that all over the world, from, China all the way into more Western areas. I think it's fascinating, actually, because I think, Chanel was never, it was sort of reserved for a certain person, if you will, probably when it was further up on the quadrant. But in actuality, there's an incredible draw from, again, elevating consumer, a striving consumer. Certainly in the Chinese markets, very purposeful, common prosperity is, the goal. And so I think the fact that the brands are trying to figure out what is that right balance of making themselves more accessible, having products that are more purchasable, if you will, and then still remaining with that level of luxury. And I would just give one maybe example of brands that are doing it well and figuring it out, I think why brands like Chanel, brands like Rolex and others, I think are maintaining their edge, is being able to collaborate with local designers as well. And I think that mix match of and potentially mashup is the better word, of collaborations between luxury brands and newer luxury entrants that are coming into the market, designers and people who have a local influence and local design sensibility that are joining forces with some of these brands and appealing to, I think, a different, discerning, younger audience are the ones that are continue to be really relevant. And there's no question that I think the demand for luxury is absolutely still there. And, if we were having this conversation even 5 years ago, we would have said never would anyone be purchasing online really at the level that they are? And many of the stores, as we know, were really resisting going online. And we have, I think, Tmall really to thank for dimensionalizing what digital shopping could look like and doing it in a way that elevates the shopping experience and makes it accessible.
Really interesting. Harry, your thoughts?
I think, I mean, wonderful points made by Beth Ann on luxury and the interaction with it. To truly understand why luxury is in that space and why luxury's accessibility has changed, we have to understand the relationship that the younger consumers today have with money. And there's a big difference. So if you look at the previous generation's relationship with money was primarily about accumulation and security and safety, particularly in China with the 90s generation onwards, where financial security is not a thing, because financial security is provided by, because you've got two sets of parents, you've got the one-child policy in action. There's the famous Little Emperors kind of thing, where two sets of grandparents and two sets of parents are all sort of looking after the needs. And so money is not actually about security. That's taken care of by the family, which means the younger consumers feel much more comfortable spending money with luxury. And luxury started, the reason why you see that decline in differentiation is actually because it's become more accessible, not because they become more affordable, but because people don't think twice about spending money on luxury. And it is seen as something that you want to live and access the finer things in life. And I think on the brand side of it, whether it's, and this is unique to Asia, and the luxury experience of the same brands, whether you're talking about Chanel, Rolex, Patek Philippe, all these brands, in Europe and America and in Asia is totally different. In Asia, these brands have really played it to the hilt, the component of scarcity when it comes to things, right? You have to pay for certain items among these brands. You would have to pay 6 months in advance. You pay fully and wait for the product to come, and hopefully it will be delivered not in the color of your choice. You just take what you get. And that's very different from the United States, where you can actually walk into a Rolex showroom and if the watch is available, they sell it to you. But out here in Asia, they won't. So it's very interesting to see this contrasting mix of, as more people don't think twice, more people want to access luxury, and because their relationship with money has changed, the brands, in order to maintain their premiumness, have taken a step back and become less accessible in terms of the actual availability of the goods in order to retain that desirability. So it's a fascinating dynamic and probably a session of its own.
They're very fascinating, very fascinating. The only thing I would add to any of this in terms of luxury is I think there's a bit of a shift to technology as luxury, and I think like just think about how the iPhone. When would you pay $1,000 for a phone before this? So there is a little, particularly with younger people, I'm assuming. I remember when I first had my first Razor, I was like, yeah, right. So it's been a long time coming, but there's definitely been a little bit of a shift there as well. Let's talk about the other extreme. I think we have a few more minutes. Value. Again, value is very important. I'll be really quick here. It's important everywhere. It's particularly important in China, as you see higher percentages agree with, shopping with digital coupons and so on, setting budgets. But again, it's a global phenomenon. Any brands doing value well? Any brands you could think of that just are, value being less expensive is not necessarily what I mean, but brands that are offering value that stands out as a, doesn't mean,
You want to go first, Hari?
Sure. I think it's very important, Michael, to understand we're talking about value and not price. And very often in marketing, we equate and use them as synonyms and synonyms, and that's wrong. So when you look at value brands that are seen as providing value, particularly with e-commerce, where today it's facilitated the discovery and the transaction at a lower price is very easy because there are so many platforms to just and buy it. So what is actually driving value? And I'll go back to the unlikely example of that Hai Di Lao, which is a hot pot restaurant, which you saw came up in both trust as well as love. And they're able to deliver value because of that experience layer, which means it's just not about where can I find the cheapest transaction price for that same element. There are thousands of hot pot restaurants around China, but they've been able to provide value by adding that experience layer. So the value comes from the way the brand interacts with you, the way you experience what the brand has to offer. And that's true of Nike as well. Again, even in China, the Nike stores, while they're not a great source of volume, are a very great source of how the brand experience is delivered, and therefore the value that you get out of innovation when experienced in the right atmosphere. You may still go back onto Tmall and look for the cheapest seller of a particular Nike shoe, but what they've ensured is that Nike is not the cheapest sneaker. You're just looking for the cheapest Nike, and that is a big difference. So the value is not coming from purely price, but that experience later that you're adding, that really makes the connection with what people sort of goes back to that love, right? So if you have love and trust, those are huge components of how you would find something valuable.
And I would say that in BAV, we see that good value and worth paying more for are actually positively correlated, right? Because good value is something that if I'm getting quality for it, I'm going to pay more for it, and that's a good value. Beth Ann, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll add in the concept of a deal to this, because I think that's also very much pulling purse strings now, is the perception of a deal on top of is it worth the value that I'm going to be paying for it? And I do think that's a big trigger and motivator right now, being played out slightly differently in different markets. Why China, obviously 11/11, and why we're all here talking right now, is such an amazing shopping festival and day, because there's this big feeling of gamifying that deal moment. And I think getting us to think about buying things that may not have previously even been on our list or in our minds. And I also think the fact that there's so many deal apps that are popping up right now too, that are just there to help people manage the flow and the sense of a promotional code. I think online's done that to us a bit, because I know even outside of Asia, when you're on a site purchasing something, especially luxury goods or things of expense, and it says, do you have, there's that box of, do you have a promotion code, makes you want to go looking for that promotion code if you haven't gotten it yet. So that that mechanism of feeling like some percentage off should be built into things, or the rise of duty-free shopping. Even when we're not going through airports at the same level that we may have before, there's now new spaces and places for duty-free shopping. So I find these kinds of elements of how we seek value to be really interesting too. And if I were to predict in the future, even more so, I think that the whole concept of deal tied to loyalty is going to also continue to be something we look at. If you think about what's happened with like subscription purchasing, for instance, I think that there's going to be a renewed focus on loyalty and what that means for brands to kind of become the preferred brand based on loyalty-like programs and mechanisms that give you that sense of sort of everyday value being generated against the love that you're getting from the brand.
I'm fascinated by the reward economy completely for a long time. I can't wait to see what's next there. Do we have time for one more? I can't see the screen, so I'm hoping we have time for one more topic.
Yeah, it looks like we have a few more minutes.
2 more minutes. Okay, I have 2 more topics, but we could just do this last one and then we have time. And this is made in China. Again, we oversee the best country study with the U.S. News and World Report and Wharton School of Business. And it's and if you need help, John Kevney sits in London, is overseeing this study. We have another one coming out in 22. But we have amazing data in there about how people view countries and things manufactured by country. And I just want to give you a couple of sound bites. This globally, 54% said they would consider purchasing a Chinese-made product around the world. So these are influencers and people around the world. How do they consider it? So they would consider buying made in China. This is the one they prefer. About 30% say, so that falls off a bit, right? So, what is the power of made in China these days? And what's the value there? And what does it bring to the customer? I would say when you start to look at the countries that are owning a specific sector around the world, if you think about where would I prefer to mostly buy automobile, Germany, Japan, then Italy. Beer, it's Germany, Italy. Germany's pretty strong in terms of manufacturing. Fashion is France, Japan, Italy, and so on and so forth. China is not making the top list of the list, on the top 5, it's a tough place to be. I will say technology, it ranks number 13, again, out of almost 80 countries. So, and again, pretty good in most of these, but it seems like technology is a strength in China right now for exporting. And just any thoughts on made in China? Any thoughts there? I know it's a bizarre one, but something I'm fascinated by.
Well, if I may start on this, Bethan, just made in China is fascinating, right? You said 54% would, if only they knew 100% of what they buy is probably made in China, right? I'd have to search far and wide to find a person who's not been touched by a made in China product. And that's the reality of today, China made. Now, the ubiquity has spawned obviously a lot of discontent, and you guys in the US have seen the brunt of that in the form of your previous administration. But I think what is key is really understanding that ubiquity has made it more acceptable, which means that today, 9 out of 10 times, if you picked up something that was really well made and you flipped and saw made in China, you wouldn't really skip a beat, with very few exceptions. I mean, if you saw a Murano glassware and it was made in China, you'd be disappointed. But by and large, you wouldn't be disappointed. I mean, the Apple computers, the iPhones, everything is made in China. And so I think they've done a phenomenal job of that being, at one point, I remember about 10 years ago, China had to run a campaign because made in China has become synonymous with bad quality products that wouldn't last long. They've made a huge transition. There is still stuff made in China where I think credibility is an issue, but technology has really helped them power. And I think the whole 5G controversy, while again it's a geopolitical controversy, inadvertently what all the Western countries have done is position China as the 5G leader, position China as the leader in AI, because once you position something as they're so good we have to be afraid of them, you're doing a great service to that brand, which probably even a campaign they dreamt of couldn't do.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
The only point I'll make to underscore all of this, and I guess to leave it right now, is going to be supply chain. Because I think that, if the supply chain is working and the performance is there, the delivery times and distribution times are there, then I think that will go a long way in continuing to, sort of elevate in people's minds, and admire what China can get done across all of these different sectors. If it becomes more and more of an issue, then I think that will have disproportionate challenge and pain across the world for China.
Yeah, and we do see the rising importance of being an agile brand or an agile nation, and that's a really good point. If they can step up and make stuff happen during this, it's important, because they definitely, at least in the U.S., you start to see where are the backlogs of things and why aren't things getting here? Whose responsibility? And there's a lot of pointing fingers. Very interesting. I think we're about out of time. If I'm wrong, please tell me, because again, I can't see anybody else. But thank you both. I'd love to do 100 more panels with you guys, because you make it really easy. So thank you so much for your feedback and insights and expertise in this space. And thank you, Sarah and David Roth, for putting us all together. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.